We're debating this morning whether the NHS should be abolished. You know, the institutes have come out and said that we should look at other models, look at Europe, some other countries in Europe that have this sort of insurance policy model, social insurance, some of them call it. What was your experience at the NHS? My experience of the NHS, not just this time, but as you know, I've had other incidents over the last few years, has been absolutely outstanding. I cannot... Well, from an acute care point of view, it is outstanding. I think where it has a problem is in elective care with the waiting list. So the waiting list for my operation was going to be 18 weeks. Well, they said you'll be operating at 60% capacity between then. I thought, well, I can't do a 3-hour radio show. I mean, imagine you doing this show at 60% capacity. You can't do it. Yeah. So in the end, to have the operation, I had to go private. Now, the care there was brilliant too, but I can't fault the NHS apart from the last bit.
You see, I think there's various systems that are being looked at, and they're always a little bit the devil's in the detail, isn't it? And one of them is the Netherlands, other systems like in France, and they have some form in the Netherlands of payment, mandatory. Everybody has to pay into a form of health insurance. And, you know, I haven't studied the model closely myself and it isn't massively clear from the report, but, you know, it's whether that would be government-backed or how it would work. I mean, are we at a crisis point when we think of Lord Darcy's report where we have to look? We know the NHS is just a treasure, but we have to look at ways, as Ian says, of once the acute's passed, how the rest of the service is
There's lots of different ways to finance it, but we've had a massive problem in this country even talking about financing social care, haven't we?
Yes.
Let alone our general health care.
Which impacts on the other healthcare,
One of the biggest problems is that there are too many people coming into our hospitals, into the acute sector, when actually they should be dealt with at a local level in the community. And that's part of the challenge here. And, you know, yes, that's a resource issue, but it's also about our whole attitude towards prevention and treatment. And, you know, for a long time, we haven't focused more on that primary. I spent the day this week, Kate, with some school nurses and health visitors, and they were just saying how much more they could do in schools with children and young people, not just on physical health, immunisations and all of that, but also mental health as well. So we store up problems for ourselves in the acute sector because we're not dealing with things quicker.
But how do you fund that, you see? Because if you haven't
got the culture...
I mean, what will be the government's response to this? Because, you know, in the last 14 years, had the Tories talked about private insurance policies or private insurance, they would have been lambasted. I mean, it was almost a swear word to use the word private when you talk about NHS as being part of the solution. Do you think Labour will start entertaining that now?
I don't necessarily think they'll start entertaining it, but I think it's absolutely right to point out that people, you've just said about yourself, Ian, if there is an alternative and they're facing waits, then people will turn to the private sector. Ironically, some of our NHS staff actually do the private work as well. So I can remember, you know, when I first became a member of Parliament, you know, constituents coming to me and being told that if the person they were seeing in the NHS had said to them, if you want me to do this quicker, you can pay. Now, that might be OK for some people, but for a lot of people, that is just completely out of reach.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? You ended... Exactly. So you're in a situation where brilliant acute care, patched up, life saved, but then you need something to be fully functioning. We've talked already this week about the huge increase in the benefit system. We're now the sort of sick man and woman of Europe in terms of the amount of health benefits that we claim, so much higher than elsewhere across the continent. But, of course, that could well be people waiting for operations to be active. So if you haven't got the money to get back to work and then you haven't got the money to pay for the operation, you're ending up with an increasingly squeezed part of the population that's feeling unwell, poorer and struggling, and then costing more in benefits.
And if you... when I was actually Minister around work and welfare reform, someone once said to me about the old incapacity benefits, because that's what it used to be called, and it's changed its name along the way, that if you found yourself on some of these benefits and action wasn't taken within 2 years, you're likely to be on them for a long, long time. And the age profile of people on these health benefits is getting younger. And these are people who could be working with the right support. So, again, I think it is about changing our mindset about waiting for the treatment solution where we should be doing the prevention and getting in quicker.
When you say changing our mindset, as an individual, though, Caroline, we can't change the mindset of a public body in that way. And what we know is that there's huge amounts of money going into the NHS, but clearly still not enough. So in a way, it does come down to money, doesn't it?
It's partly money, but I do think it's still about culture. I mean, we have some great nurses and other health professionals.
But they need to be paid for their time to go into school.
Some of them are being paid, but sometimes, often, they're not enabled to do the things that they've got skills for. And that's because we have... Because I think we have all these demarcation lines between different parts of the health service, and we have hierarchies that exist as well, you know. GPs and consultants, you know, need to empower some of their staff to do some of the work. Okay. I'm very happy for a nurse to take my bloods and do vaccinations. I don't need a GP to do that.
Talking of hierarchy, let's talk about Keir Starmer, who appears to have chosen a hierarchy of sorts when he wants to go to the football. He has said that it's better for him to be in corporate hospitality than in the stands because of his safety. I mean, however you look at this, here we are now 3-4 days on, or whatever it is that it's just all badly managed, isn't it? I mean, Labour seem to have got themselves in a right mess here. It took quite a while for Starmer to come out and say something. Hats off to some of the local journalists yesterday, I think, who asked him the questions right to his face. But really badly managed, bad comms, bad press. You know, are they showing the fact that they are quite inexperienced and they haven't been in government for such a long time?
I think it is a poorly managed situation. I have to say, I mean, if a journalist asks the Prime Minister, have you got a grip, are you in control? He's not going to turn around and say, no, I haven't got control.
But so, then you get headlines.
You've got the headline, I'm in control,
saying,
you know.
I'm still in control.
Which sounds
don't panic, like you're tightly hanging on, doesn't it?
But the whole optics of this is really bad for Labour. And, you know, 77 days into their administration and heading into their conference, these are not the headlines they wanted. And it is interesting around, I think, seasoned Labour MPs might be very concerned about this because in opposition, all the optics about what you said and what you did and obviously their challenges to the former, you know, the government over things, Boris over different things as well. You know, it's coming back and you should expect that. You cannot say things in opposition and then be perceived to be doing some of the same sort of activities that they criticise others for. I don't know about the security thing. But I think the problem is we're talking about a huge amount of money. If that's going to continue and it goes up next year and next year, it will become a running story.
Just want to play something, though, because, you know, this is what Starmer sort of campaigned around. This is what Labour's big line was, taking out some of this sort of ambiguous sort of sleaze that was going on. And when he was leading the opposition, let's hear, I think we've got a clip of where he's talking about sleaze, and it's really quite strong at the time, and it's very poignant today.
Can I remind the Prime Minister of the Nolan Principles, which are meant to govern the behaviour of those in public office? They're these: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. Instead, what do we get from this Prime Minister and this Conservative government? Dodgy contracts, jobs for their mates, and cash for access. And who's at the heart of it? The Prime Minister, Major Sleaze, sitting there.
Now, the thing is with Starmer, he has declared he's played by the rules. You know, there were accusations that some of the Conservatives didn't even declare some of their expenses. However, at a time when they're cutting the winter fuel allowance, it's the cost of living. They've barely been in 70, 80 days or whatever it is to accept, you know, so much money over the years from Lord Ali for clothes. And Lord Ali, in return, gets a pass into Downing Street. That is cash for access of some description, isn't it? Ian?
Yes. I mean, Lord Ali, we've known he's been a low donor for years. It's all been declared. There isn't any sort of suggestion that's improper. And I don't think anybody begrudges the Prime Minister going to see his favourite football team each week. Where I think people do have a problem is thinking of a couple who earn in excess of £200,000 a year not being able to pay for their own clothes or glasses. That, I think, does stick.
But he can also pay for Arsenal, though, couldn't he? He could choose. I mean, he can't go to every game.
To be fair to the Prime Minister, he pays for an Arsenal season ticket, and he will have taken advice. I mean, I will defend him on this a bit. He's taken advice, and the security people tell him it would be much better if you were in a box. Now, when this story first broke, my interpretation of it was that he was getting a box for the whole season. Well, I know at Chelsea, and this is at Arsenal, but I know at Chelsea, that type of box costs £500,000 a season.
Wow.
Exactly. Now, I don't know what the costs are at Arsenal, but I suspect they're not too far off.
I don't think it's I think it's probably corporate hospitality in one of the lounges. I mean, it's...
Yeah, but the impression given was that it wasn't one of these
that
sort
he
of posh
bought
boxes.
himself that.
But there will be... I mean, I'm at Aston Villa. Prince William comes to Aston Villa. He doesn't sit in a box. He sits with the directors. Now, there's still a lot of public around him, but security probably contain it. It's not in one of the bigger stands. Now, William probably doesn't pay. He comes along. But Keir Starmer could just pay. He could choose five times I'm going to go. And
I mean,
pay
Arsenal, again, as a West Ham supporter, I hate being fair to Arsenal, but I think they probably said to him, Prime Minister, look, we've got this box free or whatever, the space free, would you like to take it? And he, I suspect, almost unthinkingly said yes.
And I think that's part of it, isn't it? And I agree partly with what you're saying. I mean, he is a massive footballer. He wants to go. He might. Well, he might put, if he's paid for a season ticket, and that's good to know. He could put that against it and say, look, I have paid for my season ticket. If it's a security issue, it's a security issue. I think one of the issues here is a sort of lack of awareness of how this will be perceived.
Well, I agree with you.
And it's not to say,
just on the security,
it's not to say
though,
about,
just on the security,
that he hasn't abided by the rules, because he has.
If Jackie was still here, she had a season ticket at Aston Villa when she was Home Secretary, and her security had to go with her for that. But she still was in the stands.
Yeah.
Now, OK, different time, but were they less dangerous times when she was Home Secretary? I don't think
maybe
so.
she had to pay for tickets for security to sit around her. I don't know. You might know.
Well, that would have happened.
And then I don't know how that much costs. I suppose, as you say, it speaks of a lack of experience in managing
this set of headlines today is terrible.
It's
virtually
terrible.
every
paper. And virtually every paper saying I'm in control. I mean, the Daily Express has got this. This is a gentleman. We've interviewed members of this group who are veterans who were on Christmas Island around there when the atomic testing was going on, battling for compensation because it's still unrecognised in some ways, the damage that caused them. They've had cancer. He's there in the paper saying, his name's Jack Barlow, I survived atomic bomb test and cancer, but I'm terrified about surviving this winter because of the lack of fuel payment. You know, the idea that this short into a Labour government's term, pensioners are feeling that. How could they... And at the same time, closed glasses, season tickets are being purchased.
It's a bonfire of vanities, isn't it? It's all coming together.
It feels like the end of a government when they've lost touch.
Well, it is political amateurness because you don't have to understand economics or finance or politics to think, well, they're saving £1.4 billion through this winter fuel allowance cut. There are plenty of other ways that they could have saved $1.4 billion. I mean, they could have taxed all of us on this panel, for example.
Well, we have a budget. We have a budget coming up. Maybe there will be that.
I'm sure they will, but it just smacks of cack-handedness.
But also, I mean, with this story as well, obviously the Bank of England has found £10 billion.
Down the back of the sofa.
Apparently, something to do with government bonds. So there's an opportunity here for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, she's not going to say anything before the budget, but that will be both an opportunity, but it will heap up the pressure on her. Next week at the Labour Party conference, Unite the Trade Union, big Labour supporting union, has got a motion down on the winter fuel payment. There'll be pressure from backbench MPs, not just about the publicity, but because of this reveal about this 10 billion, to put pressure on, because that far outweighs the savings from the
Is there any chance you could explain the finding of that 10 billion?
Yes.
Can you, Ian? I thought
well,
you
I think I can.
Because
it
feels like...
Without mentioning government bonds, because no one...
They found £10 billion back like a sofa, as you said, Caroline, when we've been told that there's this black hole. How could they suddenly have that money?
Well, this is actually good news in some ways. I mean, I'm against quantitative easing because if you print money, which is effectively what they're doing, it comes back to haunt you in inflation.
So quantitative easing, people have heard the phrase, is when you increase the amount of cash
the amount of money supply
in the economy.
Now,
but it's not exactly
This is not exactly quantitative easing because the Bank of England put up bonds to sell to the financial markets. Now, this is a risky thing to do in some ways because if the financial markets don't have a lot of confidence in the UK economy, then maybe they're not going to buy enough bonds and it all falls flat. However, in this case, They raised £10 billion and it was 8 times oversubscribed. Now, that's good news because it means that the international markets, they look at the British economy and in the long term, they think it's very strong.
So they're betting on us.
They're going to get their money back plus a bit more. So then you think, well, OK, if they've raised £10 billion for this and it was 8 times oversubscribed, they could have raised the whole £22 billion. But that might have been too much and the markets might have panicked if they'd done that. So they've done that as a first stage. And they may do it again in 6 months' time.
So it's
was that good enough for you?
Well, that was pretty good, actually.
Thank God for that.
And so it's good in two ways, that they have the money, and also, I guess, from the government's point of view, it shows that there is belief that they can grow the economy.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's, you know, that's pretty good, given that a lot of the sort of media coverage is about, you're talking down, you're talking about this, you know, it's despairing, there's no hope. Well, actually, this is a helpful sign.
That was the thing I was going to bring up, actually. I mean, I know it's really tough times, cost of living, and it's really tough, and everyone knows that, and we know that. But part of the government job is, and I'm not just to be airy-fairy, but to give us hope.
Yes.
And to give us something
Show us
positive.
the sunlit uplands and how we're going to get
and we have none of that so far. Is that coming? Is he saving something at the party conference?
Pat McFadden, who is, you know...
The voice of doom.
Well, he is quite... He's not sort of necessarily sort of singing for the...
No.
But interestingly enough, Pat McFadden earlier this week was talking about, you know, being ambitious and optimistic about Britain's future. We should be. That seemed to me a bit of a hint that they are going to try, I hope, actually, to change a bit of the tone at the party conference. To say, yeah, you know, there are challenges, but actually, you know, we can do stuff. We can make change. We can...
It's the only way to get through things, isn't it? To know that things can get better.
Absolutely, and I think we'll see a bit of that next
You've got to
week.
have this mix, a bit of yin and yang. So Starmer does all the doom and gloom stuff, which I don't think a Prime Minister should be doing, by the way. But he does that. And then Wes Streeting will come on your programme and be the voice of sunny optimism. Now, that can work, but you...
Well, it should be the other way around, in a way.
It should. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Let's move on. Yet again, a story of somebody who's no longer with us, but has left behind what might be some reports of 100 victims of sexual assaulted incidents. This is Mohammed Al-Fayed, once called the most famous shopkeeper in Britain. This is just awful. I mean, even if some of these are absolutely true, and you would have thought quite a number of them will be, but it's the idea that these women, young girls at the time, will never get any justice for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I listened to one of those women on the radio earlier this week, and it was heartbreaking. And I think what it also reminds us of is how, you know, lots of people work in environments, in this case, you know, women, where the power dynamics are really so difficult. And, you know, listening to this woman talk about certain incidents which, you know, actually on its own, you just thought, oh, probably if you're working in that environment in the office as a secretary or PA, you might say, oh, yeah, just ignore that bit of it. But then it ratchets up and into the most horrific crimes, basically, that happened. And I think, you know, again, it's another reminder that when one woman came forward and was brave enough to speak out... More came out. And haven't we seen that time and time again, that so often... It's the tip of the icebergs in this situation.
Do you think we have moved on?
He was such a pillar, wasn't he? In the sense, you know, the owner of the most famous shopkeeper in the world, because he ran Harrods. And there with Diana, Princess of Wales, and all of those things.
And you do wonder, Kate, a little bit how many people might have known about his behaviour to women in the workplace.
I did.
Did you?
25 years ago. Now, I'm going to be quite careful what I say here because... somebody I know very well, who's in the public eye, told me that somebody who worked very closely with him had told them that Mohammed Fayed had put his hand down her knickers. 25 years ago. Now, if they'd told them, they would have told other people. I don't blame the woman for not coming forward because it's a very difficult thing to do. But these stories were going around for many years before he died, and it would have been great if these stories had come out while he was still alive. He was a stain on our society in so many ways, and this is just the tip of the iceberg that I think we've heard over the last few days. There will be a lot more to come out.
The new owners of Harrods, I should say, have apologised, said they've put measures in place and, you know, have distanced themselves from this just for the sake of...
And they are new owners, and they've been new owners for quite some time. Just on that, though, do you think we've moved on as a society? Women in workplaces, women in these big department stores, wherever it might be, do you feel that they are more empowered to speak out now? Or do you think that nothing has changed in terms of the atmosphere and the culture?
I think in recent years, in different sectors, in the creative industries, in politics, you know, in this sector, you know, as well, actually some really brave women have actually spoken up. And often they haven't been believed, first of all. Often they've been tried to be silenced or you know, their own behaviour brought into question. But I think the truth is that we still, regardless of the law, and we do need laws to protect people from this sort of thing, we do need organisations, employers, to make it really clear to their workforce and to their managers about what they expect from the culture of their organisation. But the truth is, you can have all the procedures, but the truth is, when you're alone with somebody and they're using power, the power of their status, to keep you quiet, I'm afraid that's something we're always going to have to be alert to, because I don't think that goes away because you pass a law.
It is a power dynamic. I mean, if you are somebody who is a public figure and you've done this sort of thing, and somebody sort of very low down the hierarchy, I think nobody's going to believe me.
Well, either don't believe me, or even if I do, I'm not sure what good it'll do.
And your
even
career
if people
could be at
believe.
risk.
Yeah, and livelihoods and all of that. Just not entirely unrelated, the new measures to tackle domestic abuse. This idea of embedding specialists in the 999 control rooms to help those who ring up, who cry for help, be believed and dealt with on that very first call, so that we don't see some of the tragic cases that we have where it, you know, it isn't dealt with. What do you make of that as a step?
I welcome that, because I don't think you can necessarily have call handlers who can be expert in everything. And I think if you've got other people, in this case, in terms of domestic violence, who are, you know, are very much aware of that, attuned to that, for me, that's really important. But then the question is the follow-up.
Yeah.
What happens with the follow-up, Kate? Because we're hearing too many awful, awful stories of tragedies where people do ring up. Sometimes it is logged that it's a domestic violence incident, but even then, the action isn't taken to really follow through. And whilst there's some fantastic, as we know, police officers in our country who, you know, go beyond what they're expected in their jobs, again, it just takes some of these situations to end in death or a tragedy to remind us where sometimes they fall down because they haven't followed up, they haven't taken it seriously. And when it comes to domestic violence, obviously we talk about the adults, but so often children are witnessing this as well, and that has an impact on whether they're boys or girls for the rest of their lives.
And it would be good, I think, to have domestic violence specialists in big police stations as well, because if a woman has no confidence that the police will take her seriously in these cases, I think that's a real problem. But and the fact that Jess Phillips is now the minister for all of this, I think, is a fantastic thing.
And she's on our programme later.
Well, she really does know what she's talking about.
Can we turn our attention to Lebanon briefly? So, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has called for an immediate ceasefire. He says that is the only way forward now. This last night, he said, I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire from both sides so that we can get to that settlement. Warnings from Lebanon's ambassador, Rami Murtada, said that we could be heading to a doomsday scenario. This is a huge escalation of what's going on now in Israel, involving Lebanon, and still what's going on in Gaza. I was interested to hear from Jeffrey Nice this week. Jeffrey Nice, the KC, who actually prosecuted Slobodan Milosevic and was involved in the China trials with some of the sort of persecutions that are going on over there. He's come out and said these are crimes by Israel, what they've done in Lebanon this week. And interestingly, he made the point that over the years, Western governments just simply haven't done enough to call for peace and a ceasefire. Now David Lammy is calling for this. Do you think it's going to be serious this time? I mean, we hear this time and time again, Ian, but nothing really happens.
If you have a ceasefire, all sides have got to want a ceasefire. Now, Israel, I think, is claiming that it's destroyed Hamas's military capability. Now, I'm not saying that Israel has won in Gaza by any stretch of the imagination, but if that is true, well, I mean, if Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, which they show no sign of doing, well, that might be one way forward. But this has broadened out now into a three-way conflict with Hezbollah in the north. They've been throwing rockets over into Israel over the last few years, as well as Hamas from Gaza. And I think the problem here is that, I mean, I hear what you say about the KC. But the fact is, Israel does have a right to defend itself against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a prescribed terrorist organisation in this country. And I think a lot of people who saw what happened with the pagers and walkie-talkies thought, well, that was a targeted attack on Hezbollah terrorists. Now, you
But
can't have it both ways.
it was.
It was aimed at 3,000
How can you be sure?
Hezbollah terrorists.
How can you be sure where those pages are, though? Some people will say
Well, they were all bought by
they're going to be in
Hezbollah.
public places and civilians will possibly under attack.
And this may sound very callous, but in a war situation, there are always going to be innocent civilian casualties. Now, I don't defend that, but we couldn't have fought the Second World War.
So you're saying if in the days of the Troubles, if the IRA had got into a hotel, held people hostage, it would be fair game for the British government or MI6 to fire off their personal devices, and anyone left in the hotel, if they were to die too, that would have been fine?
Well, you're putting it in a very emotional way.
Well, it's not. It's a direct comparison.
If the British government could have found a way in this manner of killing 3,000 IRA terrorists in 1989, I think they would have probably done it, and I would have completely agreed
Well, they probably didn't do it because they knew of the civilian
Well, the technology didn't exist in those days, so we'll never know.
I think, look, I mean, I look at some of this and think, well, actually, what is the outcome here? Because as far as I can see, and from what I've read, is, within Lebanon, not everyone in Lebanon supports Hezbollah.
No, they don't.
There are Lebanese Christians, Lebanese Sunni, because obviously Hezbollah is Shia, and they do not support Hezbollah. Actually, what I was reading is actually it's not uniting people behind Hezbollah, but it's actually uniting people against Israel. So
And
what
to
is
be
the
fair,
end
not
game?
all
What is the
people in
end game
Israel
here
support the Israeli government's
Exactly,
actions
exactly.
either.
This is Netanyahu. This is his strategy. This is his tactic. And where is the end game here? We've got 150 hostages that were taken last October who are still not home. We don't even know how many of them are still alive. So where does this take us? It just heightens the problems. And, look, Hezbollah is a prescribed organisation. It has been firing rockets into Israel.
Yeah.
And they have the right to defend themselves. But we also know that a huge number of civilians have been injured by these devices. People are in a state of fear. People are thinking, is it going to be solar panels? Is it going to be fridge? What else would it be? And it doesn't help. Where does this take us? It is escalating.
Of course it doesn't help, and I think the fear
scary.
is that it escalates into a Middle Eastern war. That's the fear. In fact, the Lebanese UK, Ambassador UK said that. We'll have to leave it there for now. Really good to speak to both of you.